What we endeavor to do is really start with the consumer. So everything we do is in service of addressing the needs of the consumer. And I think that's why innovation is so exciting, is because you're trying to put yourself in the mindset of the consumer. And data can't answer everything. It's a great starting point, but innovation is a mix of art and science. And so we try to ground our decisions in data as much as we can, but often it's our instincts, our intuitions that have to fill in the gap. We do a ton of research early on in the process, as most entrepreneurs do, on what are the behaviors, what are the motivations of the consumers, to try to discern not what they want today, but what they might want tomorrow.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another incredible episode of Fortunes of the Brave. Mary Katherine Johnson here, CXO of Planet Wealth, and I can't wait to dive into a conversation with my guest, Nick Malouin, because he's a strategist, shaping innovation, and we've also got the word electric in there somewhere. So those three words together are very intriguing to me. So welcome to the conversation, Nick. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me, Mary.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for jumping in and chatting with me today. So let's start off, for those people who don't know who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, so I am a senior strategy director at a company called Electric Innovation. And Electric is a strategy, innovation, and design consultancy, which really that means is we help our clients develop new products and services, all the way from origination of the concept through prototype, through pilot, and all in service of top line growth. And so that's kind of me in a 30-second pitch. I haven't always worked in innovation consulting. If you go back just a couple of years, I started in more traditional consulting, working my way through an organization called Capgemini, which is a larger IT and operational consulting company. I did that for a handful of years, more on kind of process improvement and org design. Really loved the experience, but realized that I wanted to be closer to the consumer, the end consumer who were purchasing the products. And just around that time, Capgemini purchased a company called Fahrenheit 212, which was one of the first innovation consultancies in that space. And I had an opportunity to learn from the partners, some of the amazing brands and products that they were developing, and was really immediately enamored with the possibility of working within innovation consultancy. And fast forward a couple of years, I'm now 10 years into a career in innovation.
Wow. Okay. So yes, those three words are probably some of my favorite, right? Maybe electric is, not as high on the list, but innovation and strategy, right? Those two things. I mean, let's start with from where you were and where you are now. What were some of the mindset shifts? What were some of the changes you had to experience in order to go into innovation and strategy as a full-time gig, to use that as the focus for product development?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say the acceptance of uncertainty, especially in innovation, I would say we're dealing in probabilities and possibilities. And I think a lot of other careers, especially in more traditional consulting, there's more finite answers. There is more of a right and a wrong answer, at least in that moment of time. And so I think understanding that you won't always be right, that there are possible futures, and that our job as innovators is to explore those different possibilities and explore what that world might look like given certain scenarios. And so I think just being comfortable with that uncertainty has been important. I'd also say that just being generally curious about the world and having a mindset of continually learning and being kind of open to change. I've always been interested in human psychology and behavioral economics and the way our minds work and some of the biases that influence our purchasing habits. And so I think just having that curious mindset on at all times and being kind of open to new ways of thinking.
And as I love that. And as our world becomes more complex, that's kind of that's just the natural progression of it. It's the complexity then adds uncertainty because can we really know every step of what we have to do when it's more complex? Now we're adding AI to the mix and just the level of noise. So that complexity to even get attention, let alone create a new product or go from ideation all the way through to completion of a new idea, a new product is a very complex
Hmm.
process. So
Yeah.
how does that fit into the whole thing, and how do you help people navigate that? So once they get through, okay, this is uncertain. Okay, this is a little more complex. Okay, I still have to learn and grow, but can I learn fast enough, right? And then take them through that process. How have you been able to navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in part why Electric exists. If you look at the consulting landscape, players usually exist on two ends of the spectrum. They play more on the known entities. So companies like McKinsey's, the BCGs, who are very much focused on what already exists, the proven data, but maybe at the expense of what's possible. And then on the other hand, you have more brand agencies, design agencies who are very good at exploring what's possible, but don't always have the answers on, well, how would this actually work? And so I think where innovation is most successful and where Electric really focuses on merging those two. And as you said, especially as the world is changing, the cycles of trends are compressing. It's really important to be able to explore the North Star of what new products and services could look like while also still being realistic and grounded in reality. And so that's just how we look at the world of de-risking bravery, and making sure that our clients are comfortable with pushing the boundaries, knowing that we've done the due diligence on knowing what's possible.
So this sounds like a marriage between those two things you just outlined, the tried and true practices and relying on the past, which is the only time you can look at data is from the past, from what has
Mhm.
actually happened, and taking that and then projecting into the future what might be possible. And I love what you said, de-risking bravery. I mean, you have to be brave.
Mhm.
You have to jump in, and I think that's not that people who don't want to jump in aren't brave at all, but it's a different kind of bravery. It's a different,
Mhm.
especially when you're dealing with businesses and money and stockholders and investors and customers, right? That where is that? And that's not the scope of this conversation to dive all the way into all those things, but to look at those things and look at that bravery and look at where you're focused and what's required. What is at stake? I always come back to, I used to drive an ambulance, right? So I always come back to, okay, nobody's dying right now. Nobody in front of me is dying because of this marketing decision. So let's take a look at it as to who's going to be impacted the most and how much are we willing to risk toward that impact. So in that sense, how does this kind of strategy then fuel potential creativity in these endeavors in trying to look at what's possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we endeavor to do is really start with the consumer. So everything we do is in service of addressing the needs of the consumer. And I think that's why innovation is so exciting, is because you're trying to put yourself in the mindset of the consumer. And as you said, data can't answer everything. It's a great starting point. But innovation is a mix of art and science. And so we try to ground our decisions in data as much as we can, but often it's our instincts, our intuitions that have to fill in the gap. But ultimately, we are trying to get in the heads of the consumer as much as possible. And so we do a ton of research early on in the process, as most entrepreneurs do, on what are the behaviors, what are the motivations of the consumers, but not just listening to them, but observing their behaviors, their hacks, to try to discern not what they want today, but what they might want tomorrow. And so I think that's how we try our best to kind of forecast future needs. Beyond listening to the consumer, I think there's other kind of tactics that are helpful that we use, looking at other signals in the market. So what's happening out of category, as an example. So I think it's very easy to fall in the trap of what am I doing? What is my company doing? What are my competitors doing within my category? But I think the value of consultants and what we do is bringing that external perspective of what's happening in other categories that might have some implications for us. But ultimately, what we want to do is try to tie what we believe is happening to those human truths, and not deviate too much from that.
So two things I want to unpack on that. The first thing is, how are you defining category?
So for us, when we say category, it's a market, it's a vertical. So we play at Electric across categories, but a lot of our clients are within, as an example, food and beverage would be a category, or consumer electronics, or health and beauty. So of course, when we're working with a client, they're very much focused on their specific category. Most of their innovation is within the core sometimes, and we encourage clients to look into adjacencies and new business models. But the majority of innovation is what we'd say is Horizon One. It's focused kind of within the core, within the category. But I think there is value in looking outside of that specific category and what's happening with other consumers, that might have implications or inspirations for us.
Got it. Yeah. Because one of my favorite books is Play Bigger by the Category Pirates, is a group of authors called the Category Pirates, and they specifically are focused on category design, meaning not just the market, but really the space within which the company plays and how they can dominate that space and actually redefine it through innovation. So that's when I hear the word category, I'm like, oh, a Play Bigger guy. You a play? I just love that book. But anyway, and then the second one, you talked about human truths. When you're talking about the core human truths, tell me more about that. What do you mean?
Yeah, so I think when we're speaking with consumers or kind of doing ethnographies, going into their homes and observing them, I think there's things that are told and then things that are true. And so, not to say we don't trust the consumer; they're invaluable and during the research process. But I think if you look at trends, there's long-term trends, and there's noise in between. And so I think when we're kind of looking at, well, what do we believe will be true in 3 years or 5 years, and what might fade in the near term, I think we're ultimately trying to tie back to um, the core human motivations, whether that's convenience or value or um, entertainment. There's just certain core values that cuts across categories that all consumers are looking for. And so I think when we're just discerning between what we believe are kind of more permanent long-term trends versus what might fade in the short term, I think we're ultimately trying to tie it to something that will be lasting.
Definitely. And the another thing that you mentioned that I want to dive a little bit into too is you said future behaviors of customers. You said what customers are doing now or buyers, um, as opposed to future behaviors. How can you predict that? I mean, obviously, if you start with some of those truths, you can, in some point, I'm assuming that's where you start, and then in some point you can take those truths and potentially predict what might be happening when you take in to consideration all the new inputs a customer is experiencing based on how they take in information, the internet, social media, advertising, the changes in all those. I mean, all of those parameters are changing constantly. So how do you predict?
Yeah, I mean, we would never say we're in the future prediction market, at least not with absolute certainty. But I do think it's important to kind of understand what trends might influence consumers today and tomorrow. I think there's obviously a couple challenges. We've spoken about kind of noise versus future, more lasting trends. Another challenge or risk is over predicting the future, in that we extrapolate what we kind of hope might happen. So kind of looking back at the internet in the 90s, or e-commerce today, or EV adoption today, and kind of predicting that the future will happen quicker than it actually will, maybe because we want it to. So that's just another trap that we try to avoid in predicting the future. But again, we're looking when we are looking at trends at kind of possible futures. So not defining a single future, but exploring different possibilities of what that future could look like. And again, we're just trying to the best of our ability, tie it back to a core human insight on what is a tension that is currently unsolved, and how might we address that, assuming we think it's going to last more than the next 6 months. So again, it's part art, it's part science. We do our best to ground ourselves in the data, but ultimately we're taking a leap of faith anytime we're going into the future.
Yes. So it's kind of a paradox, right? Where we want to be able to anticipate what might be happening, especially for you as a consultant for your customers. But at the same time, trying to stay ahead of those trends without just burning out into hustle, right? You're just
Mhm.
hustling, trying to work and do these predictions. And especially when you add in what we want to happen, what we would like to have happen. That's the difficult part of this kind of prediction, because we have to take those emotions out of it, and there's where as much data as possible can come into play. I mean, when I'm looking at numbers, right? If I'm looking at a funnel or a flow, and I'm going to say, okay, here's a registration page for a webinar, and here's the typical percentage that might come in, and then here's the percentage that might show up, and then here's the percentage that might book an appointment, a sales appointment, and here's the percentage that might show up to that. So I'm predicting based on previous experience, but the market, the actual customer that I'm targeting is
Mhm.
going to change that. I mean, there are so many places along that
Mhm.
flow that those percentages are impacted.
Exactly.
So how do you keep this mindset of innovation when you're also looking at those kinds of statistics and not burn out in just hustling with those numbers?
I think we data will never answer the question. It will give some indication on where consumers are heading, but the challenge for our clients is everyone just it base their decisions on data. You kind of get the logical, obvious answer, rather than something that might be new or inspirational. And so that's kind of the magic of innovation, is extrapolating the data and not predicting the linear progression, but where it might deviate or change based on some of those parameters that you mentioned. And that's often where and when clients reach out to us, is when something has changed unexpectedly. So maybe just as a quick example, we were working with a gardening client a couple years ago. They develop or they produce plants and soils and gardening equipment. And this was post-pandemic when sales were flying and growth seemed unlimited. And all of a sudden, a couple years in, growth stalled, like it did for a lot of companies post revenge spending in 2022, 2023. And they reached out to us to understand what was happening, because the trajectory of the data was pointing in a very different direction than what was ultimately happening. And so we worked with them and uncovered that new gardeners are very sensitive to the success of their gardening. So I think we can all relate as amateur gardeners. When things don't work out, you can often give up.
Lose
Uh,
interest, yeah. Hmm.
exactly. So um, even though during the pandemic everyone was super enthusiastic about gardening, a couple years in, if things didn't work out, then all of a sudden they give up. And so for us, it was determining how do we provide that inspiration for the gardens to keep them excited, keep them vested, and keep them buying plants and soils and gardening equipment. So that's just an example of how the data might point in some direction and then something unexpected happens, whether it was a pandemic itself or the post-pandemic fatigue of gardening or traveling or what have you.
Yeah, I would think in that sense, a nurturing campaign would be very valuable to give examples of, hey, is this you? Are you like Sally, who was all excited and planted this wonderful border, and sorry, didn't quite work out. The fertilizer was not the right type, or the watering schedule wasn't the right type. And here's how she transformed that once she learned. Come to one of our quick courses, or something, some kind of nurturing campaign to help people understand they're not alone. This is a natural phenomenon. But you still want that garden, right? You still want those beautiful bluebells or those beautiful morning glories or whatever. That's the exciting part to me. That is just so fun to try and help people who've gone on a trajectory to continue along that through the bumps, right? Because that's kind of a pivot idea, right? Pivoting plans. The strategy is less about rigid roadmaps and following a specific path, and more about evolving, I don't know, playbooks, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's why strategy has to stay nimble and be able to react very quickly to new changes. And I mean, in the case of that work, it was again trying to really understand the consumer and what they were going through. And um, in a way, it was quite simple. They were looking for inspiration and reassurance. Um, but in the case of gardening, interesting, what we found is that the education was quite academic. And so if you bought a gardening book, it would be size 10 font, there would be
Yes.
few pictures.
Yeah.
And what people are looking for, especially younger beginners, is more visual inspiration from other gardeners that aren't getting it right on day one, and just making them feel more comfortable on failing and learning and that entire process.
Yes, that's it. So I look at, I've switched my thinking, because I've been in marketing since 2003, right? So I've switched my thinking from a sales process or a sales funnel, which is really focused on my company or whatever company I'm consulting with and our products and how we are important and we are solving problems, to a buyer's focus. And you're talking about consumer, same concept, but a buyer's funnel or a buyer's focus. And it really is focused on the buyer and their journey and what's important to them. So in that sense, yeah, it's not a factor of just learning. Like my husband loves gardening, so he'll go look at his Sunset Garden book and he'll go, okay, this one's supposed to grow 3 feet high and 3 feet wide in a typical environment, and he loves consuming that information. But most people, if they just want their border to look pretty or their lawn or their, whatever, their yard to look nice, they're going to want to see pictures. They're going to want to see what it's going to look like, what we're headed toward, and what someone else has handled as a difficulty. So yeah, it just makes sense from a buyer's perspective. If I'm not a gardening expert, like probably most of the people who started and are maintaining this gardening business, we need to think as a newbie, as a normie, as a first timer, and go back to that idea. So it's really about awareness at the top of the funnel, then curiosity or consideration. Is this the company I want to go with? And then, okay, yeah, at the bottom of that funnel, I'm ready to buy. I'm ready. You just need to show me the product that I'm actually looking for based on what I've consumed of what you have. And so that process is different from the traditional sales method. It is definitely buyer focused. It is definitely consumer focused. And we have to be there now. We no longer are in an age where you can put up an advertisement on the I Love Lucy show and everyone in the country will see it and think you're the only solution. We're no longer there. We're way past that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
and I think
yeah,
that
go
what
ahead.
you're describing is also the consumer journey from end
Yes.
to end. And so
Yes.
again, it's not trying to sell at a single point in time. It's trying to engage with consumers along their journey in the moments that matter for them. So not just focusing on that upfront sales moment, whether that's online or in store, but supporting them and engaging them, looking for opportunities to add value beyond the product transaction itself.
Yeah. Oh, completely. You have to, because especially with this new breed of human, which are completely native digital. I'm not a native digital. I'm a native analog, right? I had, a landline phone until probably about 5 years ago, right? but they are native digitals. They are bombarded with with information all day long. It used to be that you only needed 7 touches. Way when I first started in marketing, you only needed 7 touches to get a sale. Now I've seen averages from HubSpot up to 66 touches, because we're identifying a touch as seeing a social media post, seeing an ad, hearing something on Spotify, or all of those touches, driving by and seeing an advertise. All of those touches we're being bombarded with them, and so we have to shift the focus from a single point, like you say, to really a journey, and making sure that when we capture that attention, we're doing the right thing with it. It's not just to capture the attention and they see our name, because that doesn't mean anything. Most of the time we can see an advertisement and not remember what the company is, but we remember the ad. So how do we take that then into and translate that innovation and those ideas into actual actionable plans and strategies to actually take action on to make a difference?
Yeah. So we find the starting point is what we would call an insight, which is a tension that requires a solution. And it's very easy to jump into solution mode, and it's often the most fun part of the job is coming up with the ideas or the products, the features. But we spend a lot of time on defining the insights, the tensions, essentially the problem to solve, before we get to solution. And we find that the best solutions are grounded in kind of a core consumer insight. And it's almost like the solution reveals itself once you have a very crystallized problem definition. Maybe just as another example, we were working with in financial services in Vanguard, and we did a lot of research in helping to increase savings rates and investments rates and increase digital literacy within the investment community. And what we found is that people really struggled with investing because it was a race without a finish line, in the sense that they didn't know how many years they had left. And so it was really difficult for them to plan for an uncertain future, just the same way if we were running a race and we didn't know if it was a sprint or a marathon, it's hard to plan. And so that drove a lot of uncertainty, and people would just push investment into the future. It's a tomorrow problem. I'll worry about it another time. And so by really understanding and defining that problem, the solution in a way reveals itself. You are looking to provide them with something tangible to an intangible problem. And so we help them develop a product that asks them about their future ambition. Where do they want to live? Did they have any health issues? Did they want to give money away to their friends or family? And then what it produced was essentially a number, a target number, and a savings rate that they had to match. And so I think that's really our process, is a discovery mode where we focus on not just the consumer, but the category, the channel, the company. And then we really define those problems, and then we, through a mix again of data and intuition, we develop solutions that we believe can address those problems.
Brilliant. Yes. Brilliant. Yeah, that's because you took something intangible and tomorrow, and I'll worry about it tomorrow because it isn't impacting me right now. And it's difficult to think about right now because I don't have anything to equate it to tangibly. You took that and made it tangible and made them start thinking about, because that's really all you did. Instead of just leaving it open-ended, you just brought it to a tangible near-term future. To say, what about this? What about that? How do you think about this? And then they're like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I want to do that. Okay, yeah, that sounds good. I want to do that. And then it produced a tangible result of, all right, well, if you want to do those things, then here's what you have to do now. Exactly. And I would probably add the question, so where's that money going to come from when you're 60?
Exactly.
To do that. Shouldn't you start putting that away now so that when you're 60, you can have it? You don't have to think about it then. now the thought's already done and you've planned for it. And now when you get there, it's done. You don't even have to think about it.
Right. And we do work a lot with clients who are trying to change behavior. And I think that's the hardest part of innovation is trying to change fundamental behavior, which is in the case of investing, delaying because it's painful, it's uncertain. I'd rather spend today than tomorrow. Or if it's healthcare, avoiding going to the doctor because it's not fun. I'm afraid of the answers. And trying to change human behavior is much more difficult than kind of piggyback on how we already kind of operate and think. But it's an exciting challenge. In investing, interestingly, there's also the opposite problem of people saving their entire lives and then not knowing or not feeling comfortable spending or not having an income and seeing their savings kind of go up, 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 and then down, 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 down. And so I think investing is another example where it's not just a single problem we're solving for. There's different consumer segments and each requires a slightly different solution.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us back to the idea of bravery, really, bravery and curiosity. So in that sense, how can people who are eager to level up, to innovate, how can we help the brave ones, the ones who are actually eager to do that, and the curious ones go from ideas to actual impact?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is it's incredibly hard going from post-it, idea on a post-it, all the way through an in-market product. And I would say it's even harder in a corporate environment. So I think the first thing to acknowledge is it's a non-linear path going from point A to point B, and requires a lot of devotion, but also a lot of flexibility. I think that's one thing that we've learned in our experience is never become too emotionally invested in your own ideas because there's almost no chance that it'll end up the way you envision it. But in terms of kind of advancing ideas, I think once you have defined the problem and you have a concept, I think it's really about kind of bringing that to life in a way that will resonate with consumers. And I think another thing that we focus on is making sure our concepts address a single problem. I think we get in trouble when we try to do too much at once. I mean, it's important to be brave and push the boundaries, but you also want to be hyper focused on a single problem. I think in our experience, it's also critical to get feedback as early as often as you can. And there's a lot of different ways you can get feedback from your consumers, from your stakeholders. But it's important to kind of get that feedback early to test your hypotheses rather than kind of push forward in a direction that you're not 100% certain about. And interestingly, even in kind of a corporate environment, timelines are constrained, budgets are constrained, and so there's different tactics that you can use to get feedback. There's still the more traditional methods of focus groups or surveys, but the most effective ways that we've done is kind of more real-time feedback. So one thing that we do that is also always really exciting is launching our concepts through Instagram advertisements. So
Mm-hmm.
what we call Instagram props, essentially communicating the idea through an ad and then seeing the click-through rate
Mm-hmm.
of these products. Are people clicking through? Of course, it doesn't go anywhere. There isn't kind of a product landing page, but just to get a sense of are people interested enough
Mm-hmm.
in the value prop or the brand proposition or the concept to kind of actually click versus a survey or focus groups, which there's always kind of mixed incentives in how you answer. So I think for entrepreneurs or you're even innovation consultants, it's about trying to get the most realistic, real-time feedback so that you can very quickly iterate or pivot if you need to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Okay. Thank you for this conversation. Really, Nick, it's been enlightening. It's, again, these are some of my favorite words. And the key is taking that innovation, that bravery, that curiosity, and actually translating it into cash and actual actions by our potential customers and products that actually do improve people's lives. So people listening to our voice can find more information about you in the show notes for sure. So they'll be able to dive deeper into what you do. Is there any last piece of advice, any last words of wisdom to help people translate that innovation, that strategy into tactical actions so that they can actually impact their world?
Yeah, I would say have a long-term commitment to the innovation, to the work. We find very often that it's the biggest challenge of getting kind of an idea through to market is that so much can happen along the way. So many variables can change. So it's important to balance the commitment to your idea with the flexibility and the ability to adapt along the way, which is, I think, a skill and a challenge that we all have to deal with. But at least in kind of a more corporate setting, and the same is likely true for entrepreneurs who have a board and investors and various stakeholders, is ensuring that you have the commitment and they have the commitment to see it through and not get derailed by more short-term interventions that are impossible to predict, but really pushing through and adapting when you need, I think, would be the advice from our experience that I think is also relevant to entrepreneurs.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I know this has been enlightening for me, and I'm sure for everyone hearing our voices today to be able to use some of these techniques and especially human behavior ideas to impact their own businesses. So thanks for sharing this time with me today.
No, thank you so much. The pleasure was mine.
Did this episode help you tackle a mindset shift? Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Your feedback can provide actionable solutions to others seeking access to opportunity.